You've heard of Street Fighter, you've heard of Streets of Rage, but how about Street Fighter Rage? Every so often someone decides the established rules of a beloved franchise simply aren't enough, and instead of respecting those traditions, they gleefully kick the table over, smash the china, and start moulding new ideas from the broken pieces. The result is occasionally disastrous, sometimes inspired, and once in a very rare while, so audacious that you cannot help but admire its existence. Fortunately, in this instance, it's the latter case. What we are examining carries the unmistakable aura of a passionate creator who woke up one morning convinced the universe desperately needed more pixelated violence, more projectile spam, and more of a Street Fighter roster, but this time in belt scroller form. I stumbled upon this digital oddity not through a grand ceremony, but through the sort of accident one only experiences when rummaging through arcane fan communities, emulation packs, and the retro projects polite society pretends to not exist. Within minutes of stumbling across it, I realised I wasn't dealing with a simple beat-em-up or a standard fan tribute. Instead, I was met with a fever dream, offering a spectacle so absurd that it is impossible not to be drawn in. So today, dear viewers, allow me to take you by the hand and guide you towards something both deranged and delightful. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the insanity that is Street Fighter Rage. Yeah! If you were playing video games throughout the 90s, you'll remember it was an awesome time to be alive. Especially if you grew up with amazing games like Street Fighter 2 and the Streets of Rage series. Pixel perfection was everywhere, even if some of the best versions of games of the era were locked exclusively to arcades. This of course included the exhilarating Marvel vs. Capcom fighting game series. But what's really cool is that by using my links below you can get a massive 61% off the 7 game spanning arcade collection. You can also save 78% off the massive Cowabunga collection, 83% off of the Capcom Fighting Collection, 82% off the Beat 'em Up bundle, and up to 90% off of thousands of modern titles too. What's even more mental is that these deals are just the tip of the iceberg. Instant Gaming are currently having a Black Friday sale, meaning if you buy right now, you're getting in during a very short window where prices are even more ludicrously low than normal. So happy shopping, happy savings, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. The creation at the centre of today's investigation goes by the rather grandiose full name of Street Fighter Rage World Olympic Tour. A title so bold and magnificently overstated that it evokes the spirit of a 1990s import cartridge with questionable localization, or at the very least, titling that matches the most infamous Taiwanese bootlegs. The moment you see those words, your mind instinctively conjures sporting arenas, international competition, and the timed button mashing events that would make Daley Thompson blush. But what you receive instead is a globe-trotting carnival of unfiltered hand-to-hand violence in which the Street Fighter cast descend upon entire continents like pixelated demigods, resolving geopolitical tensions with the business end of a dragon punch. This ludicrous experience was created by a fan developer known as Brazombie, a familiar figure within the openbor community. This is not the work of a casual tinkerer throwing sprites into a blender, but of someone who has long treated Capcom's back catalogue as raw material for increasingly ambitious mashups. Modders such as this exist in a peculiar space, somewhere between archivists and alchemists. They are not attempting to recreate official releases, nor are they chasing the rigid craftsmanship of professional studios. They want to see what happens when you bend the venerable franchise over your knee and force it to play by the rules of an entirely different genre. And make no mistake, this fusion is deliberate. Where many fan projects fizzle out after an enthusiastic concept pitch, Street Fighter Rage did not vanish like so many abandoned experiments. It began life around 2016 and continued to evolve throughout subsequent versions, including silver and gold editions that offered alternate interpretations of the experience rather than simple patches. Each represented a modder refining a strange vision with the kind of attention official developers reserve for seasonal balancing or full-scale expansions. Of course, like many of these fan games we have looked at on here, the beating heart of that vision is the openbor engine, the open source successor to the original Beats of Rage framework. It is the refuge of those who believe the beat 'em up never truly died, but fractured into countless fan-driven branches. Openbor is less an engine and more a manifesto, a place where gifted lunatics can take CPS2 sprites, Mega Drive Brawler assets and whatever else they can tear from their ROM folders and transform them into playable fever dreams. Here, Street Fighter Rage found its audience, eventually appearing in all sorts of places, including retro handhelds and Raspberry Pi builds, where unsuspecting players encountered it as if it were some long-lost Capcom relic. From the moment you take control of your fighter, it becomes clear that Street Fighter Rage has no intention of behaving like a traditional beat-em-up. Where titles such as Final Fight or Streets of Rage build tension through caution, space and attrition, this creation embraces theatrical excess. It is not a patient stroll through hostile streets, it is a parade of destruction, treating every encounter as an opportunity to demonstrate overwhelming superiority. The premise of Street Fighter is inverted. Rather than carefully dissecting a single opponent, you stride confidently into crowds and leave them as collateral damage in the wake of your attacks. But while it might seem a bit strange to see the most iconic cast members of Street Fighter in a brawler as opposed to a versus fighter, what you might not realise is that a beat-em-up was planned to carry the Street Fighter name as early as 1989. Street Fighter 89 is one of gaming's strangest what-if moments. Before it became Final Fight, Capcom originally planned it as a direct sequel to Street Fighter, set in a gritty, crime-ridden city instead of a global martial arts tournament. The idea was to shift the series into a side-scrolling brawler, casting the player as an ordinary vigilante rather than a disciplined martial artist. The problem? Playtesters didn't recognise it as Street Fighter at all. There were no fireballs, no iconic martial arts, and no sense of competitive dueling. It was chaos in alleys, pipe swings to the face, and desperate survival against gangs, and that actually worked. Capcom wisely dropped the Street Fighter branding, renamed the project Final Fight, and accidentally birthed one of the greatest beat-em-up franchises of all time. Street Fighter 89 didn't die, it simply mutated into something louder, nastier, and far more influential than anyone at Capcom expected. Years later, Capcom would return to its roots and reinvent the original concept of Street Fighter entirely with Street Fighter 2, restoring the one-on-one martial arts dueling that the series was born from. It became the gold standard of competitive fighting games, disciplined, precise, iconic. But if Street Fighter 89 was the rough brawler spirit, and Street Fighter 2 was the elegant tournament master, Street Fighter Rage fuses these two ideas into a single, glorious riot. It takes the disciplined roster and recognisable movesets of Street Fighter and dumps them straight into the chaotic playground of a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Fireballs become crowd control, spinning kicks become street-clearing weapons, and characters who were designed for duels suddenly have to survive against waves of enemies. It's not a sequel or a remake, it's the alternate history where Capcom didn't choose between the arcade brawler and the competitive fighter, and instead let both instincts run wild at the same time. Playing this, the most immediate surprise is the accessibility of movement and combat. Street Fighter's traditional vocabulary, quarter circle inputs, timing windows, and controlled specials have been reimagined for a genre where you are perpetually outnumbered. Motions that once demanded precision are condensed into simple directional inputs or single button actions, freeing you to unleash fireballs, lariats, and uppercuts with almost reckless abandon. The title may evoke the pomp of an Olympic tour, but the spirit is closer to Street Fighter 2's World Warrior Tournament, translated into the language of the side-scrolling brawler. Throughout these games, you will recognise assets from all those titles' classic stages. The gameplay is unapologetically indulgent, designed not to test stoicism but to amplify ego. You are meant to walk into the screen as a champion and leave it as a tyrant. Rather than dissecting patterns or rationing meter, Street Fighter Rage hands you a box of fireworks and tells you to light them all at once. It abandons the technical modesty of its parent series and embraces something primal, a celebration of spectacle and excess. It is not Street Fighter translated faithfully into a beat-em-up. It's basically Street Fighter set loose. Visually, Street Fighter Rage is a compelling lesson in what happens when reverence and recklessness occupy the same mind. It does not attempt to craft a unified aesthetic in the way a commercial studio would. Instead, it creates a collage, a patchwork of borrowed identities whose contrast becomes the essence of the experience. A single stance or startup animation is often enough to trick you into thinking you are playing something official. That illusion collapses though wonderfully when you look beyond the fighters themselves. The backgrounds pull from an entirely different lineage, all sorted mosaics stitched together with the enthusiasm of a child gluing stickers into a school project. Street Fighter Rage has an almost reckless affection for visual effects, and the audio design follows the same maximalist philosophy. The soundtrack is a parade of high-energy remixes, techno, guitar-driven fan arrangements, and hyperactive renditions of classic Street Fighter themes. Building on this, the sound effects bear the unmistakable fingerprints of the arcade. The Hadouken, Shoryukens, grunts and victory calls arrive with familiar CPS2 clarity, as if the cast are determined to remind you that this is Street Fighter, regardless of how many goons are being flung across the screen. Collision sounds are sharp and theatrical. Every impact lands with the crash of an arcade punch, loud enough to make you glance behind you for a cabinet that isn't there. What you are left with is not a neatly harmonised audio-visual package, but something deliberately unruly. Street Fighter Rage does not pretend to be a legitimate console release or a lost CPS2 prototype. It revels in its identity as a fan-driven chimera. The polished sprites whisper a visual, the remixes scream illicit, and the stages look as though they've escaped from a suitcase of mismatched cartridges. In any other context this would be a flaw. Here, it is the point. The presentation embodies the same ethos as the gameplay, excess, audacity, and a refusal to treat the rules of the medium as if anything more than loose suggestion. Street Fighter Rage is unusual in that it does not possess a traditional critical record. You cannot leaf through issues of Edge for earnest reviews, nor will you discover Digital Foundry breakdowns analysing its frame pacing. Like most homebrew titles, its reception exists almost entirely within the communities that stumbled upon it. Emulation enthusiasts, openbor modders, and retro hobbyists who trawl forums for peculiar curiosities. In these circles, the game is not treated with the detached skepticism often afforded to fan projects. It is quite rightly spoken of with the fondness reserved for an eccentric relative who refuses to behave sensibly, yet remains impossible to dislike. One remark appears with striking consistency. Players describe it as a relaxing beat-em-up. The power fantasy is so pronounced, the enemies so plentiful, and your abilities so overwhelming that the experience becomes almost meditative. You do not need to inch forward cautiously. You advance triumphant, sweeping aside crowds with dramatic flair of a professional wrestler making an unannounced appearance. Threads echo this same sentiment. People return to it not for challenge, but for the pleasure of feeling utterly dominant. Equally noteworthy is the respect it receives as a finished piece of homebrew, a rarity in the openbor ecosystem. Many fan-crafted brawlers collapse beneath their own ambition, full of half-implemented systems and placeholder sprites destined to be remembered as prototypes. Street Fighter Rage, by contrast, is frequently described as refined. Controls behave as expected and collision boxes remain consistent. This is not to say it has escaped criticism. Certain fighters can dominate entire screens, while others feel hopelessly ill-equipped to survive large swarms. Yet curiously, this imbalance is not universally condemned. For many, it is simply another expression of the game's unhinged personality, as though the designer deliberately abandoned fairness and instead allowed the cast to behave like exaggerated caricatures of their iconic traits. In the end, the reception of Street Fighter Rage is a testament to what players truly value. They do not celebrate it because it is balanced, elegant or sensible, they celebrate it because it is fun. After all, it delivers an unfiltered, hyperbolic joy that larger studios seem terrified to attempt. It may bend every rule of its source material, but the communities that embrace it do so with a clear understanding this game is a moment to excess, and excess pursued with conviction is far more memorable than restraint. Capcom has spent decades refining Street Fighter into a competitive ecosystem in which every frame matters and every matchup is judged by professional viability. Street Fighter Rage could not care less. It treats Ryu's fireballs not as a technical tool but as a celebration, an excuse to tear holes through crowds. It takes the aura of legendary characters and refuses to encase them in balance patches or developer intent. In doing so, it feels oddly pure, a tribute to what many players imagined Street Fighter was when they first saw it as a child, before they learned about damage scaling and tier lists. That is the beauty of fan curiosities like this. They are not beholden to canon or licensing, nor to the anxieties of shareholders. They exist in the wild, imperfect, unfiltered, and occasionally illogical, simply because someone wanted them to exist. Let's be honest, no professional team would have attached the World Olympic Tour moniker, nor stitched alpha sprites into Mega Drive landscapes. Yet here it is, digital vandalism carried out with such earnest conviction that it becomes charming rather than crude. It would be dishonest to pretend Street Fighter Rage is immaculate design, or that it will appeal to players who treat gameplay as a delicate science. But that is not its purpose. It reminds us that gaming, at its core, is built on curiosity and audacity, a medium where ambition is sometimes expressed, not through restraint, but through unabashed spectacle. You do not play it to master systems, you play it to grin at its audacity, which in my opinion makes it more worth your time than at least half of the official releases of today. Don't forget you can get a massive 61% off of a 7-game span in Marvel vs Capcom Arcade Collection, 78% off the massive Cowabunga Collection, 83% off of the Capcom Fighting Collection, 82% off of the Capcom Beat 'em Up Bundle, and up to 90% off of thousands of modern titles too. Also, of course, Instant Gaming are currently having a Black Friday sale, meaning if you buy right now, you're getting in during a very short window where prices are even more ludicrously low than normal. So happy shopping, happy savings, and I'll see you all again soon.